Don't ask me what my hair is doing because I have no idea either. Hello everyone! Welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if you're new. My name is Kristen. This is my booktube. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about the books that I finished in March. Before we just dive on in, I will say I only actually finished 3 books in the month of March. So I know you're looking at the timestamp and being like, if you only finished 3 books, why is this video so long? I decided since I didn't read that many books in March, I would go a bit more in depth talking about the books that I did read. That's why this video is a little bit longer than usual. So I'm gonna keep the intro talking to a minimum so that we can get more book content in this video. So yeah, let's just go ahead and jump in with the stats for nerds. Alrighty, so like I said, in the month of March, I only read 3 books. Well, I should say I only finished 3 books. I made progress in more books throughout the month, but I only actually finished 3 books in the month of March. And the moods for those 3 books were tense, mysterious, and dark. As far as the pace of the books that I finished goes, we had 50% fast-paced and 50% medium-paced. So all 3 books that I finished in March were all audiobooks as well, and they all fell into the 8-hour to 15-hour and 59-minute range. And I believe for these categories on StoryGraph, this is like the medium length for audiobooks. And I think the only other 2 categories are under 8 hours and over 16 hours. So all 3 of the books are right there in the middle. And then fiction versus nonfiction, all of the books that I finished in March were nonfiction. So here's the graph if you want to see it, but it's just a pink circle, so not much to see there, to be honest. And then as far as the genres of the books that I finished go, all 3 of them were considered thrillers, and then there was 1 book that was categorized under the LGBTQIA genre, 1 book that was categorized under the mystery genre, and then 1 book that was categorized under the crime genre. Then for the star ratings, I had 2 books that I rated 3.75 and 1 book that I rated 4.25 stars for an average of a 3.92 for the stars that I gave the books that I read in March. That is it for the stats part of this video. So go ahead and grab yourself a beverage and we will hop into the actual reviews of the 3 books that I read. Alrighty, so the first book that I want to talk about in this video was actually a book for my work book club, and it was Mother's Instinct. So this title may be familiar to some people. I know it was familiar to me when they announced it, although not because of this book. The reason why it was familiar to me is that this book is being made into a major motion picture starring Anne Hathaway and Jessica Chastain. So I had seen those previews before this book was announced as our book club pick. And to be honest, I didn't even know that that movie was based on a book. I had just seen the trailer, and as you can probably imagine, because I'm into thriller books, I'm also into thriller movies. So it was marketed to me as a person who enjoys a thriller. I was intrigued and I had made a mental note of it. And then when it was announced as our book club pick, I was very surprised that the story was already in book form. So I was really happy with the fact that I got to read that book, because I don't think I would have figured out that that movie was based on a book if not for my work book club. So Mother's Instinct is a mystery / thriller that centers around 2 French families. I don't know what all was changed for the movie, but I do know just from trying to look up the cast and see who plays what character while I was reading the book, that they did change the names from the very French sounding character names to Americanized ones for the movie adaptation. So right off the bat, I knew that they had changed the names of all the characters. But yeah, it should be interesting to see what else they change from the book adaptation to the movie when it does finally come out. I don't know when it's actually meant to come out, but I know that I've been receiving ads for it, so I'm guessing it's slated for sometime in late spring or maybe even summertime. But that is not what we're here to talk about. We're not here to talk about the movie. We're here to talk about the book. So, Mother's Instinct centers around 2 families that live in the suburbs in France. They don't say what city that they live in, but they do say that one of the main characters is a taxi driver, and they mention him going to pick up people coming off of the train from Paris. So I'm assuming that it's close enough to Paris where people can commute into the city and then back to this suburban town. At least enough to where one of the main characters, who is a taxi driver, can rely upon people commuting to and from Paris to make his money. So I'm guessing that they are somewhere near Paris, but just outside of the city. I'm gonna do my best to enunciate these French names. This is how the narrator of the book pronounced the names, so this is how I'm going to pronounce them as well. If it's wrong, I'm sorry. I'm just following suit from the narrator of the audiobook that I listened to. So the story centers around two couples and their two sons. One couple is Laetitia and David. David is the taxi driver that I mentioned earlier, and their son's name is Milo. And then right next door is where their best friends live, Laetitia and the husband, whose name I believe is pronounced Sibon, and then their son, Maxime. So those are our 6 main characters, and there are a couple side characters. David has a really good friend named Ernest, who is the godfather of Milo, and there are a couple other minor characters throughout the story, but it mainly centers on these 6 people and their 2 houses that are right next door to each other. And they have lived next door to each other for a very long time. They were friends before their kids were even born. When Laetitia is about 3 to 6 months pregnant, then Tifon finds out that she is also pregnant, and they both have boys around the same time, and essentially raise them together, and they are a very, very close-knit group of people. And all seems well and good for years after that, until the boys are around 6 years old. And that is where the bulk of our story takes place. We get a little bit of filling in of backstory when the women are pregnant, when the kids are little, things like that. But for the bulk of the story, we are focused on when these boys are around 6 to 7 years old. I will let you know when I'm going into spoilers, but this part is not a spoiler because it's literally in the description of the book, in the trailer of the movie. So I'm not really giving anything away. But when the boys are around 6 years old, there is a day where Maxime is homesick from school. And as Laetitia is sunbathing in her garden, she sees in the second story window of her neighbor's house Maxime, who is very ill, leaning dangerously far outside of his bedroom window because he is hot and hallucinating. Laetitia tries to yell at him, tries to tell him to go find his mom to get back inside, but he can't hear her very well, and it only makes him lean out of the window farther. And so Laetitia rushes over to their house in an attempt to let Tifon know that Maxime is in danger and try to save him. But unfortunately, she is too late, and by the time that she does get there and they get up to his bedroom window, he has fallen out of the window and he passes away. So I'm not giving any big spoilers away by telling you how Maxime dies. I believe it's mentioned in the description of the book and also the trailer of the movie. I will be sure and mark some chapters at the bottom so you can easily skip over any spoilers if you do want to read these books and remain spoiler free. So after Maxime passes away, this fundamentally changes the dynamic of the relationship between the two families. From that point, there's a lot of tension and resentment that builds between the families. Laetitia and David become offended when they try to go over and console the grieving family, only to be turned away. And then in return, the grieving family kind of starts to resent Laetitia and David for having a healthy son when their own son just met his untimely end. And as the weeks and months go on, Laetitia starts to notice odd things are happening around Milo and begins to suspect specifically that Tifon is trying to kill him. There are accidents that happen surrounding Milo that end up with him in the hospital, and Laetitia just seemingly becomes really paranoid. Or so people seem to think. So overall, I did quite enjoy this book. I thought it was pretty well written. I wasn't sure who to trust, so I wasn't really sure if Laetitia was on the right track and Tifon was actually plotting to murder Milo, or if she was overreacting and it was just the way she was looking at the situation that made it seem that way, and there was actually an innocent explanation for everything. And it wasn't really until closer to the end of the book that it was confirmed one way or another. And so I did enjoy that because it did keep me guessing, even though my initial gut instinct was correct in the end. I think that the author did a good job of making me doubt my initial conclusion of what was going on here. I do remember there was one specific moment in the story that did convince me of what was really going on in this story, and I was correct in the end. And this is where the spoilers are gonna be, so if you're adverse to that, go ahead and skip ahead to the end of this chapter, and then we'll be back. This is your last chance to skip ahead before I spoil this book for you. Okay, I think they're gone now. The moment that gave it away for me was a very small moment, I will say. There's a very specific reason why it gave it away to me. So there was one specific part in this story where, as a peace offering, Tifon brings over this beautiful plant to give to Leticia because they had an overstock at the nursery that she works at, and she already has too much in her garden, so she thought that she would gift it to Leticia. And the plant that she gives her is foxglove. And foxglove is beautiful. This is what it looks like. It's a very pretty plant. I do enjoy foxglove a lot. However, one thing you should know before putting foxglove anywhere near your house, animals, children, anything really, is that foxglove is poisonous. And as a horticulturalist, which is Tifon's profession, what she's good at, what she knows a lot about, she would know that foxglove is poisonous. And also because of the fact that Tifon did not disclose to Leticia that it is poisonous. Right away, I was like, that's shady. That is very shady of Tifon to do. And I couldn't figure out exactly what her plan was with doing that. Initially, I thought that maybe she thought that Milo would go out and like eat it or something. I don't know why. Like, he's not a baby that just sticks random things in his mouth. He's like a 7-year-old child, maybe 8 at this point. So he's not just going around sticking random plants in his mouth. So I was confused as to how this was going to tie into the rest of the story. But in that moment, it gave away to me that Tifon was up to no good, and she was willing to seemingly poison people to get what she wants. And it wasn't revealed until later in the story that the real purpose of that plant was to frame Leticia and or David for murder. There's this whole big exchange towards the beginning of the book about how Leticia wants Tifon to be Milo's godmother. And they have this whole conversation about how Leticia and David are, I believe, Catholic, and Tifon is an atheist, and can Tifon be a godmother if she's an atheist? So they have that whole exchange. And at the time I was like, okay, whatever, I guess this is a big deal. But the reason why that exchange is important is because the person that is murdered with the foxglove is Ernest, the godfather of Milo. So Tifon ends up poisoning Ernest with foxglove in his tea, and then gifts a foxglove plant to Leticia so that she would have the poisonous plant that was responsible for Ernest's death in her home, making them the obvious suspects. So throughout most of the book, I really thought that Tifon's main goal was to just take Milo from Leticia and David somehow. I thought that she was going to get the parents arrested so that she, as the godmother, could take custody of Milo and essentially replace her son. And I guess that is kind of what she was doing. She did want to take Milo for herself, but I did not expect her to go as far as she did. And I definitely didn't expect her husband to just be along for the ride, you know? And there are reasons for that, but I'm not going to regurgitate the whole book for you plot by plot. So if you want to know why he was complicit in doing all of these things, or all of the other things that happened with Leticia and Tifon, read the book. It's a pretty fast read. It's not a very long thriller. So while I did expect that Tifon and her husband were trying to steal Milo away from his family, what I did not expect was for them to go as far as murdering Milo's parents, which is how the book ends. Essentially what happens is David is taken into questioning over Ernest's murder. Also, I should mention that because David thought that Leticia was just being paranoid this entire time, he had no problem leaving Milo with Tifan and telling her, Leticia went out for whatever, when she gets back, tell her where I am. So he played right into Tifan's hands. So when Leticia does come back and finds David and Milo missing, she goes over to Tifan's house, and Tifan and her husband end up killing her. I believe they also poison her. I don't remember what with, but they give her some sort of poison drink. She drinks it, and then she slowly loses consciousness and ends up passing away in their living room. And then when David realizes and he is finally able to get out of the police station, he goes over to Tifan's house and he tries his best to fight against them, but he is unsuccessful as well. And then Tifan and her husband essentially stage a murder-suicide in Leticia and David's house, call the cops, and once all of the dust has settled, Tifan gets exactly what she wants, which is Milo to be her new son with Leticia and David completely out of the way forever. And that's it. That's how the book ends. I really wanted David to bust in like in the last moment and save Leticia, or even if he couldn't save her, to do something to take out Tifan and her husband, take Milo and run. Like, I wanted some semblance of the family to stay together and get away from Tifan and her husband, but that did not happen. So yeah, in the end, I did really enjoy this book. I thought the twists were really good. I did kind of guess the ending, but not fully, because it did kind of go farther than where my mind went, which is not really something that happens in thrillers a lot. Usually my mind goes way farther than the thriller does, but that was not the case this time. There were parts of it where either I didn't like the plot points or I didn't agree with what the characters were doing. Mostly what I didn't agree with was people saying that Leticia was being paranoid when there were legitimate concerning things happening to her family and herself. That, combined with the fact that I did figure out Tifan's actual motives about halfway through the book, did get me to lower it just a little bit, even though the ending wasn't exactly what I thought it was gonna be. I was still close enough to where I was like, I basically understood where this was gonna go. It just went farther than I anticipated, at least in the amount of people that died in this book. But yeah, so I ended up giving this book a 3.75. I did really enjoy it. I will be seeing the movie when it comes out. And I'm interested to see if it's just like the names that they changed for the movie, or if there are other plot points that changed as well, because even from the trailer that I saw, it does look like some of the other plot points were changed too. Alrighty, moving on to the next book on my list. And this book is Just Another Missing Person by Gillian McAllister. So this is the second Gillian McAllister book that I've read. The first one that I read was called Wrong Place, Wrong Time. And I really enjoyed that thriller. I thought it was probably the most creative thriller that I've ever read, just in the way that it's told, because the very, very brief plot of that book is that it centers around a character who witnesses her son stab someone to death in front of their house one night. Then after that happens, she goes to sleep and she wakes up on the previous day before the stabbing happens. And she just continues reliving days farther and farther in her past until she figures out what chain of events led her son to murder that specific person in front of their house in the present day. And she ends up going back like 20 years. Like, I thought she was gonna go back a couple months. No, she goes back like 20 years until she figures it out. And I just really enjoyed that style of a thriller. I've never seen anything like that before for a thriller. I don't know if that's something completely new to the genre, but it was new to me and I really enjoyed it. So when I saw that Gillian McAllister had a second book out, I had to pick it up because I really enjoyed her first one and I was excited to see what she did in this one as well. Just Another Missing Person is definitely more of your conventional kind of thriller. It doesn't have as creative a plot as Wrong Place, Wrong Time. There's no time traveling in it or anything like that, but it was still a decent thriller by my standards, I would say. I ended up giving it a 3.75 in the end. So Just Another Missing Person centers on a police officer named Julia Day. I don't remember exactly what her rank is, and she's British. And the ranking system in the police in the UK is different than in the US, and I don't even know the US one like that. But I believe she's fairly high up in the ranks. I don't know what her title is, but she's a police officer nonetheless. That's all you need to know. And she works a lot of missing persons cases. This book really focuses on the case of a girl named Olivia Johnson. and follows Julia as she is trying to figure out what happened to this girl Olivia, while she is also dealing with demons from her past popping up and threatening her future. And from the very beginning, it is quite clear that Olivia Johnson is not a typical missing person. There are a lot of things about this case that stand out to Julia as being odd. She had just got a new job, literally just moved into a flat share with a bunch of other people that she doesn't know. She unpacked her stuff and then she disappeared immediately afterwards. So they get like the CCTV footage of where she was walking and all of this stuff, and she literally just vanishes off of the tape. Like, she's on one CCTV going towards an alley, the video camera that's in the alley, she's not there. So all of this stuff surrounding her disappearance just doesn't quite add up for Julia. And then once she goes to the house and starts investigating deeper, she realizes that she doesn't really have any personal effects. And as she's reviewing all of these details for the case, something just feels off about it. She looks in her closet and there are a bunch of clothes in different sizes, different styles. They comb through her social media, look through her Instagram profile, and there are a bunch of pictures there that don't match the house that she was living in. There's just a lot in this missing persons case that just feels off. At the same time, while Julia is trying to piece together what happened to Olivia, where she could be, she gets into her car one night and there's a man behind her in her car, puts a gun to her head and tells her to drive. I know, worst fear ever. It's stuff like this that is the reason why I am constantly looking around my car, checking inside of my car before I ever get inside. And then once I'm inside, immediately lock the doors. I don't have the kind of skeletons in my closet that Julia has, so I like to think that that helps my chances a little bit, but you know, you can never be too careful. And what this man wants is to blackmail her. This person has found out about something that happened in her past and is using it against her to get her to plant evidence in Olivia Johnson's room. And if she doesn't, then her little secret that she has tried so hard to keep under wraps will get out. She will lose her job, probably go to prison. So the stakes are really high for Julia. So now not only is Julia trying to figure out what happened to this Olivia girl, she is also now being blackmailed to tamper with evidence so that one specific person is pinned for the crime. And as she gets deeper into the case, she realizes that this case goes far deeper than she initially realized and actually goes way back over a year and connects to another missing girl named Sadie. And then it is up to Julia to figure out what these two women could possibly have in common, why they are linked the way that they are, who is behind this blackmailing, and why do they want this specific person to take the fall for Olivia's disappearance. This book was a very twisty ride. I had to pause it several times just to kind of think over all the information that I had received in the previous chapter. And I always enjoy when thrillers make me think like that, make me try to like piece the puzzle together. I honestly think that if I would have read this book before I read Wrong Place, Wrong Time, I would have liked this book more. But I feel like I was more impressed with the creativity of Wrong Place, Wrong Time, that this book just didn't quite live up to that same feeling that I had while reading that book, which kind of makes sense because it's more of a straightforward thriller. It's not as creative in the story structure as her previous book was. So that's not a knock on this book really at all. It's still a really good thriller. I enjoyed it thoroughly. But I do think that Wrong Place, Wrong Time is just a better thriller, more creative overall than this one is. So I ended up giving this book a 3.75 as well. I didn't quite guess the ending. I got elements of it right, but I wasn't spot on what exactly was happening in the story as a whole. But it did get me to pause the book and think about the plot and try to piece the puzzle together myself. And I did get the gist of it right. I will say that at the very end, I was a little underwhelmed by how it wrapped up just because it just kind of felt rushed to me. It was one of those where, you know, it cuts off at the end of the present timeline and then skips forward like 19 months or something like that. And then it just feels like they were on a deadline and the author just kind of wrapped up all of the loose ends in the quickest, easiest, most succinct way that they could. And it was just kind of underwhelming. It kind of reminds me of one of those TV shows where, like, you know, you get to the end and then there's this person that has done all of this stuff that should result in them getting some jail time. And then the person who was wronged at the end was like, you know what? You've been through enough. We can drop all the charges. It doesn't matter what you did to me and that I'm still suffering. You've done enough. And I didn't like that. I think that up until that last chapter, it was probably sitting at a 4, maybe even closer to a 4.25 for me. But that last chapter where it just felt so rushed, I didn't really enjoy it at all. And it kind of brought the whole book down a bit for me. And it's not that the ending didn't make sense. It did make sense in the framework of the story. It just still kind of felt lazy. So I did not enjoy that ending at all. And that's why I ended up giving it a 3.75. It could have been higher if the ending was just better. Okay, and the last book that's on my list for the books that I finished in March is They Never Learn by Layne Fargo. I would say this book is very much like if Promising Young Woman and the show Dexter had a love child. Our main character's name is Scarlett, and she is an English professor at Gorman University in Pennsylvania. And then there is also a secondary point of view from a student at Gorman, and her name is Carly. And she is a freshman living in one of the dorms. And the book follows Carly's first semester of college with her roommate Allison and their friend Wes. Right off the bat, this is a very different vibe for a thriller, at least that I've read in the past, because the book literally opens with Scarlett committing a murder. And she is so calm, cool, and calculated. It's both scary and also kind of impressive at the same time. Just how meticulously detailed she is. Like, she has everything down to a T because she's been doing this for a long time. She says in the book that she has been doing this for, I think, around 20 years at different universities that she has attended or taught at. Like, she mentions operating in Chicago when she's in grad school, and then in Iowa, and then she moves to Gorman, where we enter for this story. Like I said, she's very careful, calculated. She watches her victims for sometimes months at a time to really understand who they are, what their daily routines are, the kind of people that they are, so that she can figure out the best way to murder them and get away with it. A lot of them, she makes them look like accidents or suicides, something of the sort like that. Basically, methods that arouse the least amount of suspicion. Over the years, she has become really good at her craft. She always stays at least a couple steps ahead of the police, and she even has a go bag set and ready if she does need to make a quick escape if the police start sniffing around a little too closely to her. But all of this changes on one night when one of her kills doesn't go according to her plans, and she has to improvise. And it leaves us as the reader wondering if Scarlett can really get out of it this time. And this was really interesting in the fact that it kind of reminded me of how I felt watching the first season of You, where you know that the main character is a murderer. Like, they're actively committing murders as you are watching the show or reading the book. But then because they're the main character, you start to get anxious for them and you start to almost root for them to get away with it. And that's how I felt while reading this book. When the police or other people started like seeming like they were getting close to zeroing in on Scarlett, I started getting nervous and I was like, girl, you better have a plan to skip town or something soon because these people are coming real close to getting you. Then, as I mentioned, at the same time as we are following around Scarlett, doing all her vigilante serial killer stuff, we then also get interdispersed chapters of Carly's point of view as she navigates through her first semester at Gorman. She's a pretty typical freshman. She's a bit on the shy side, a bit more grunge, I would say. She wears Doc Martens a lot, doesn't put a ton of effort into her appearance, at least at the beginning of the book. And then she is paired with Allison as a roommate who is basically the exact opposite of her. She is bubbly, outgoing, she's a theater kid. She gets the main part in a play that she really likes. And she kind of helps Carly come out of her shell a bit. But when Allison is sexually assaulted at a Halloween party, this completely changes the tone of their relationship and just how Allison acts in general. They find out that these systems in place are pretty much just there for show so that the university can say that they care deeply about these issues, but in practice they don't actually do anything to help the women that are in situations like this. It completely breaks Carly and Allison's relationship. Allison goes into what seems to be a depressive state. She recoils. She's no longer the bubbly, outgoing girl. She doesn't put any effort into her appearance. She's barely eating. And this upsets Carly because she knows that it is directly because of this experience that she had. And as she's trying to help Allison and make it better, she just ends up pushing her further away. And you just watch as their relationship disintegrates throughout the book until it comes to a head in the last couple chapters. But I really enjoyed this book. It was kind of a cathartic read for me to see this vigilante female serial killer that commits the crimes that she does in order to protect women like Allison and Carly from these terrible men, because the systems in place are not doing enough to protect these women. Now, serial killer is an extreme, I will say, but it did make for a very intriguing premise for this thriller. There were not any super graphic descriptions of any of the murders or assaults that took place that I can remember, but I do still think that this book deserves a bit of a trigger warning. So I just want to make sure that I am putting it out there that this does deal with topics of sexual assault. There are mentions of girls getting drugged, followed, stalked. So if there are any of those themes that you are sensitive to, this might be a book that you want to skip. And if you don't feel like non-graphic descriptions of crimes like this would trigger you like that, I do think that it's a really good book. I really enjoyed the way it was written. I thought it was really fun to hear Scarlett's inner monologue as she is like face to face with these terrible men that have no idea what she does in her free time. And they are just basically exposing themselves as potential targets to her, actively, willingly. So I do think it's definitely worth a read, but don't just read it because I'm telling you to read it. If you want to read it, please make sure that you are well aware of any of the trigger warnings that come with this book. Even if you have any sensitivities towards topics of domestic violence, domestic abuse, verbal abuse, things like that, just proceed with caution if this is a book that you're interested in. The last thing I want is for you to pick up a book because I really loved it and then it ends up damaging your mental health in the end. I don't want that, but if you do enjoy a vigilante serial killer kind of trope that is also mixed with a bit of promising young woman, then I would say this is the book for you. I did end up giving this book 4.25 stars in the end. That is because I did end up guessing the major plot twists pretty early on in the book, so I felt like I had to knock it a little bit for that, but I still think that it deserved more than just 4 stars. But it wasn't quite up to the 4.5 star mark, so 4.25 is where we landed on that. And I will get into a little bit of spoilers for this one, so if you've read this book, or if you're one of those people that doesn't want to risk reading the book because of all of the trigger warnings and things, then you can tune into this part and I'll tell you the major plot twists in the book. So like I said, there were a few major plot twists that I guessed pretty early on in the book. The biggest one was the fact that Carly and Scarlett are the same person. Carly's point of view just happened when Scarlett was an undergrad. So I also think that that's a cool part of this book because you do get a bit of a villain origin story with the vigilante serial killer story, but you don't find out that it's the origin story until like 60-ish% of the way in. I also feel like I saw through Wes's good guy persona pretty early on as well, mostly from the fact that he clearly had a crush on Allison at one point that was unrequited and he was still friends with her anyway. And then he kind of started to do the same thing to Carly, where he clearly likes her, but Carly doesn't really feel the same way. And I could just feel that this was all bubbling up to a head. I fully expected him to have an outburst at one point about how, you know, he's such a good guy and like, why don't women like him? And that's exactly what happened. So no surprise there for me. I don't know if I could just sense the red flags through the audiobook or something, but I didn't trust him from the jump pretty much. Also, because I figured out pretty early on that Carly and Scarlet were the same person, I also figured out pretty early on that Alex, the cool teacher that Carly has in the beginning of the book, that ends up hitting on her when she comes to him for advice, is Kinnear, who is one of Scarlet's targets later on in the book. And potentially the reason why she came back to Gorman in the first place. I can't remember if she says that or not, but I'm pretty sure the reason why she took the job at Gorman was so that she could take out Kinnear once and for all, because he made it a habit to hook up with his students when she was a student, and he's been doing it ever since. So he's been going for 20 years taking advantage of his students. So I pretty much saw that coming really early on. They did set up another professor at Gorman when Scarlet is the faculty that they try to make you think is Alex, the cool writing teacher that Carly has, but I saw through that pretty early on. Now, the twist that I did not guess is the one at the end where Jackson turns out to be a very horrifying dude on his own. And I did not like that he was also the dude that Scarlet was hooking up with, because like her whole thing is taking out terrible guys like this, yet she's hooking up with one. I didn't like that plot point at all. I felt like we could totally do without that. But nonetheless, I did not see it coming that Jackson was a predator as well, even though she kind of alluded that he was a bit predatory, like he liked violence. She even posits at one point that she thought that if she told him that she was a serial killer, that he really wouldn't mind that much. So we do get hints that he's a bit sick and twisted as well, but I did not expect him to be the person that is stalking students and like literally breaking into their dorm rooms, because that's a whole other level of creep. But I did find the part where Scarlet murders Jackson in order to protect herself, Mina, and the student Michaela that he was stalking. I found that to be a very good way to wrap up the book, because not only did it take out one of the predators that Scarlet wasn't even aware of, she was also protecting Michaela, she was protecting Mina, another faculty member, and she was protecting herself. And then when the cops show up, they all agree to basically blame everything on Jackson. So Scarlet gets off scot-free for Kinnear and other murders that have happened on campus. Jackson is dead, so they just let him take the fall for it. And then Scarlet moves on with her life. She gets a fellowship. She moves to London with Mina. This is our LGBTQIA book. Since I haven't mentioned that, Scarlet is bi, and she ends up with another faculty member who is a woman, and they end up moving to London together. And Mina ends up helping her with her little side hustle. So yeah, and that was They Never Learn. But yeah, that is the end of this video. I have been talking for over an hour, so it is time to wrap this stuff up. If you guys enjoyed this video, I know it was a bit different than my other wrap-ups because I was a bit more chatty in this one since we didn't have that many books. Decided to go in a little more on talking about the ones that I did read. So yeah, if you liked this version more than the other wrap-ups that I've done in the past, go ahead and leave a like down below. Let me know. You should also subscribe while you're down there because I put out new videos every single weekend. And yeah, I hope you guys are having a wonderful day wherever you are in the world, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!